I am Steve Gove-Humphreys and welcome to a Labour Lives interview with Dr Barry Henley, the Councillor for Brandwood Ward and seeking the leadership of Birmingham City Council. Councillor Henley announced his candidature from his honeymoon, therefore a serious man. In fact, one Labour councillor confided in me that Barry Henley knows more about the workings of Birmingham local government than any other Labour councillor. But does he have the ability to convince enough of his fellow councillors to vote for him? In a well-measured interview, he spoke fluently and confidently. If this had been an Oxford University viva, then he would have sailed through. He wasn't even fazed by taking a telephone call from Labour's regional office in West Bromwich whilst we spoke. The apparatchiks were keeping an eye on things. Barry Henley is a man comfortable in his own skin. As he led me from Birmingham Council House after the interview, we bumped into his rival, Councillor John Clancy, parking his car nearby. They exchanged pleasantries and smiled. Both looked confident. So here is the interview in its entirety. This is a Labour Lives interview, and I'm speaking to Councillor Dr Barry Henley, who is the Councillor for Brandwood, and is also a leadership candidate in the present leadership campaign that's going on at Birmingham City Council. So, Dr Henley, perhaps we can go back to your early days of involvement in the Labour Party. I know from researches and what the council website says that you came first to Birmingham in 1971.
Yes.
Was that for university or what?
No, that was to get married. But we need to go back before then. I was brought up in Liverpool, where my Auntie Pearl and my Auntie Millie were council candidates and parliamentary candidates. My Auntie Pearl was a councillor. My Auntie Millie was a parliamentary candidate in the Wirral and stood against Selwyn Lloyd. And from the age of 5 or 6, I was putting leaflets through doors and working on campaigns. So a long time before, right back in the 1950s was my first campaigns. The most exciting time I can ever remember in politics is Harold Wilson and the white heat of the technological revolution that presaged the 1964 election. I then went to university, graduated, and came to Birmingham in 71 to get married.
Oh, I see, right. And that's where you met your late wife Esther,
yes.
Who was, of course, born in Birmingham.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
You've been always very involved in politics through family or whatever. When did you actually join the Labour Party?
At university. That's 68 in Manchester.
Right. Again, you come to be married in 1971.
Yeah.
So you're in your 20s, I take it, early 20s at that time. Yeah. And then you stay in Birmingham and work or what?
No. We moved all over the place. So the first jobs I had were, for example, in Southampton and London, and then Birmingham again for a short while, and then Barrow-in-Furness. And Barrow-in-Furness was very important to me because the MP there was Albert Booth, and there were 2 elections in 1974. As I remember them, 2 very cold, wet, miserable elections, one at the beginning of the year, one at the end of the year. And Albert Booth was a unilateral disarmer. And we've stood together outside the gates of Vickers, where they make nuclear submarines for Polaris missiles, and argued with the crowds of employees leaving at 4 in the afternoon on the hordes of bicycles to tell them that they shouldn't be making nuclear weapons. He formerly was a design draftsman at Vickers, Albert. Anyway, he's a tremendous character, and I spent a lot of time with him discussing things like the Employment Protection Consolidation Bill, which he brought in to replace the hated IRA, the Industrial Relations Act of the Heath era.
Yeah, because he was, in fact, Secretary of State for Employment.
Indeed, he was the Minister of Employment, and we had long discussions about whether employment tribunals, or as they were called then, industrial tribunals, should be kept. They've been brought in the IRA, and I persuaded him that they were the way to reducing industrial strife in Britain, and he should persevere with them. Whether my opinion held any sway or not, I don't know, but we still have industrial tribunals, or employment tribunals they're called now, to this day.
Well, you trained originally, as I understand it, as a chemical engineer.
Yes.
So you're a scientist by background.
Yes.
And you then subsequently worked, I believe, in large companies, held management roles in those companies.
Yes, multinationals, yes.
And all over the world.
Yes, as a chemical engineer in Barrow-in-Furness and in Manchester and later Crawley, I was working for BOC in industrial and medical gases, generating oxygen, nitrogen, argon, acetylene, nitrous oxide, and gases like that. And then I changed to security and fire protection and worked first for Thorn EMI and then for Chubb. And for Chubb, I worked in the UK, Singapore and Australia. They made a particularly unfortunate acquisition in Australia, and I had to spend 3 years there turning it round.
So you have a role in turning around difficult enterprises. Yes. Is that something you find a personal challenge, or what?
Yes, I'm a person who likes problems, likes solving problems. The most difficult problem of all in any business is to change its culture so that it becomes successful instead of failing. Many businesses will carry on doing the same thing even though it makes them no money or loses them money or drains their cash, and you have to change their way of thinking, their whole approach, introduce innovations and turn the culture around before it becomes a successful business. That's the most complicated problem you can solve. Birmingham City Council is in fact in that state. So if you read the diagnosis of the failings of Birmingham City Council in the Cllr report, it is exactly that the culture is wrong, the problems are not addressed, that partnerships are betrayed, and partners won't work with us. So resolving those problems requires a major culture change in Birmingham City Council, and that's why I'm standing for leader.
Well, that's interesting, and thanks for moving on to that and giving us some of your background details in the Labour Party. You've been back in Birmingham for about the last 15 years or so.
Years, yes.
And just for the record, you joined the council in 2005. Yeah. You stay for a year. You presumably lose the election in 2006.
That's right. I came in a by-election at the same day as the general election in 2005. But at that time, there was in that part of Birmingham, the anti-war swing to the Lib Dems. So I lost my seat in 2006, yes.
Stood again in 2011.
Then I'd moved from Moseley, where I lived then, to Brandwood. So the Brandwood Party asked me whether I would stand, and I agreed, and I did, and I was elected, yes.
Indeed. At the moment, you hold a number of roles. I don't know whether you're involved in day-to-day business. I presume you are. A man of your experiences, no doubt, wanted by large companies or whatever. But you also do a lot of work for different organisations. I mean, I have down here that you're the non-executive director of Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Foundation Trust.
Yes, I'm in fact the deputy chairman of the trust, yes.
And you also are the chair of governors of Old Know Academy.
Well, no longer, because Old Know has been taken over by the ARC chain. The strategy of the EFA, the Education Funding Agency, who run all academies, was that each of the Trojan Horse so-called schools would be taken over by an academy chain, so that in fact there was 100% change of management and leadership. That's what they wanted. So I came in to Old Know in July 2014 to resolve the issues whereby to become a faith school rather than a non-denominational school. And essentially that role then finished when ARC, which is a massive chain of many academies, came in by Easter of the following year. So I bowed out then. But the school had by then been changed back in character to a conventional, non-denominational local authority school.
Well, while in Birmingham, you also, it says here, founded the faculty, or headed the Faculty of Technology for Birmingham City University.
So for 6 years.
Yeah, so you were an academic as well.
Well, yes, I mean, that's the
So you've had your fingers in,
yeah.
You've got a great breadth of knowledge, can we put it that way?
I leave others to say that rather than me to comment. The reason why my name is always prefaced by doctor, even though most people don't use the doctor prefix, was in fact because I worked for the university, where everybody's called either professor or doctor. So I had a doctorate, and therefore I was always known as Dr. Barry Henley. And it was then, while the 6 years I was working for the university, I became a councillor for the first time, which is why I was always referred to then as Councillor Dr. Barry Henley. I'm not precious about the word doctor. I don't need people to call me that. But unfortunately, it's stuck, but there you go. So, because Albert Bohr, for example, is a doctor.
Indeed he is, as there are several other members of the council, Labour members as well.
Yes, but there you go. Because I was working at the university at the time, I've sort of got stuck with that title, no matter.
Fine. In fact, the doctorate that we're referring to is in management.
Yes, business administration from an Australian university.
Yeah.
I did a thesis on reducing the financial failure post-acquisition arising from cultural mismatch or additionally or alternatively from management shortcomings. So in other words, when you take over a business, they very often fail. Most takeovers fail. And there is anecdotal evidence, qualitative evidence, that they fail because of cultural mismatch. The old business can't understand the new business can't understand the old, and it fails. Or the managerial people put in are not able to run the larger, more complex combined business. So my study of 34 acquisitions in Australia showed management shortcomings weren't the problem, that in fact better and better managers were put in to try and turn around failing businesses. It didn't work. But when you looked at the cultural mismatch, you could see a direct correlation between the extent of the cultural mismatch and the inadequacy of the original projections. So if you have a huge cultural mismatch, you may make lots less money than you thought, or lots more money, but you always make a lot different from what you originally thought. So in other words, when you have a clash of cultures, the two businesses might work together superbly, but they might also fail to work together at all.
And is that something you could apply to Birmingham City Council at this very time?
Well, Birmingham City Council is not in the takeover business at the moment, but in terms
it might be taken over.
In terms of culture, yes, my area of expertise is in the culture of businesses, and as well as in national cultures. So my area of study was in that field. So when you're looking at the situation of Birmingham, where Cllr says the culture must change, you change a culture by setting a new vision, setting new values, then expressing those values in terms of your processes, your procedures, your norms, the way we do things around here. And then you have to have heroes, and say people who've done this, they've gone the further mile to do what it is we want to do. Look, this is a fantastic person, and celebrate it in all your communications. And that way, over 2 or 3 years, you can change a culture. The culture in BCC that fails is an autocratic one, where decisions have to go up to Ian and Albert, and previously they went up to Councillor Whitby. It doesn't work very well. It's slow, it's prone to making mistakes, because you're not holding people at lower levels accountable in line with their responsibilities. So you change to a more open, transparent, actually a more bureaucratic culture, where people down the line will take decisions and be held accountable for them, and officers will take decisions and be held accountable for them, and that way the whole council will run better, and you won't have a situation where everything turns into a big crisis before anybody's nominated to resolve it, which is the way it happens now.
So I'll ask you the question then. You're obviously standing for the leadership, and you famously were somewhat mocked for making this announcement from Malta whilst you were on your honeymoon.
Yes.
But nevertheless, you obviously felt passionate about getting involved and seeing what you could do as a Labour councillor, and use the skills that you have.
Well, that's the problem, you see. I do feel very passionate about the city. I love the city, I love the people, I love the buildings, and I want it to be run by the people. The threat is it's going to be run. 2 parts of it are already run. We already have 2 commissioners. The threat is the whole thing's going to be run by commissioners from the government, and in fact the people of Birmingham will have no say in what's closed down, what's not run. The financial strategy will become slash and burn, and that's what I want to avoid. I want the people of Birmingham to run the city of Birmingham, make their own decisions about priorities and spending and what they need and what they value the most, and not some commissioners who are imposed from outside. And so I thought probably the only way to stop the independent overview panel recommending to the DCLG that we be given a full set of commissioners was for somebody like myself to convince them that I can change the culture, that I can get the city working effectively for its people and in terms of its economic development. And whereas the current regime has failed and has been given a year with successive reviews, where each review it says they've failed and they haven't got it yet. So that really rules out Ian Ward as preventing commissions coming in, because he's a part of everything that's been criticised. And I don't think the others have the necessary skills or capability to do that. So my role, as I see it, is get in and run the city for the benefit of the people of Birmingham and stop commissioners coming in.
A while ago you ran a joint ticket, though not of this year, with Councillor John Clancy.
Yes.
Himself as leader, you were happy at that particular time to be deputy.
Yes.
What's changed since then?
Oh, it's just merely strategy, isn't it? There was no way of changing the leadership without defeating Sir Albert, and I never thought I had the slightest chance. So I was therefore more than willing to stand for deputy leader with John Clancy to be leader. I would be deputy leader and I would do the job that I've just described to you. But now the opportunity is there for me to say, well, it would be easier for me and better for the city if I were the leader rather than simply the deputy leader. So on the overall balance, the opportunity that comes now, Sir Albert stands aside. We don't have to defeat him, he's gone. Therefore, why should I not say that the right solution for the city is that I have the vision and the capability to run it the best, and I have the toolkit in order to get all these things that Kerslake wants, like a vision and a financial strategy and everything else, hammered out in days. We've been at this for a year. Kerslake said we must have a vision for the city by May. The City Council came out with a plan that said we're going to have one by December. We still haven't got one. We're in November now. They may still do it by December, but it doesn't look like that. It looks like they're not going to have one by December. What city can say it's well run if it can't conceive of a paragraph that describes its vision for the city in a year? I know I can fix these things so quickly and then let the city run properly, not autocratically, not me running it. Everybody taking the responsibility and with that the accountability at all levels.
Okay, well let's take some practical things. 24th of November you become the leader. Then by acclamation of your fellow councillors you become the leader of the Birmingham City Council on the 1st of December.
That's correct.
The time frame that I've heard of is that within days a letter...
First you have to go and sit in front of the Independent Improvement
Indeed,
Panel.
that's
a public meeting.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yourself and the deputy leader. So one of the things that brings to me is a particular tension because I've had the opportunity of speaking to Councillor Ian Ward,
yes.
And he's indicated to me, or at least I interpret from his interview, having listened to it several times, that John Crabtree, I do apologise, has indicated to him that he, Ian Ward, is part of the solution, not the problem. What do you say to that?
Oh, potentially, Ian Ward is part of the solution. The question it has always been Albert Bohr, and before him Councillor Whitby, and before him Albert Bohr, has been the problem, i.e. their unwillingness to truly delegate. There's no reason why Ian Ward couldn't continue to run a significant chunk of the city's responsibilities. He's done a good job in certain respects. What hasn't happened then is that the whole way that councillors divide responsibilities from officers, the way officers should take decisions at the correct level with accountability and responsibility delegated, those are the things that are wrong, and they flowed down from Albert. If I, hypothetically, was looking after Ian Ward as deputy, then there's no reason why Ian shouldn't do things like create the budget and other things like that. There's no problem, really, with anybody acting as my deputy. Ian Ward could certainly be part of the solution because his knowledge is certainly unrivaled, but he's been a party to all these wrong decisions that have been taken over the last few years, and that's why he can't be leader. He can be deputy leader, should he want to be, or cabinet member, but he can't be leader because he's taken his lead and the way he ran the city from Albert. That's got to stop. It's got to be done differently. I can do that with whoever is the deputy and cabinet members.
Have you had any conversations directly with the improvement panel about things?
No.
So Barry Henley would be a new boy on the block for them. They wouldn't really know who you were or what your views are, though they've been widely shared, I think, some of your views, certainly.
Yes.
I mean, isn't this part of what people on the outside perceive as the difficulty.
Yes.
They say we've got to keep the ship of state. You've got to keep the captain in position, because if you take the captain out, the entire team will fall apart. You're saying, oh no, this isn't the case. We can put this captain in control because he has the skills, he has the vision, and within days, you say, you're going to be able to bring about and demonstrate to them the fact that you are a credible leader, because credibility is partly the key.
Well, it's all. It's everything at this stage.
Well, indeed, I'll take that.
Absolutely, at this stage, there's no partly about it. If you are not seen as a credible leader in terms of achieving what Cllr wanted to achieve, the culture change, the partnership arrangements, the city overview panel, I've forgotten what name it's given, but we've changed the name a couple of times since then. If you can't be seen as credible by Crabtree and Co. and the DCLG, then you're finished, the commissioners come in, it's all over. The game's not there to be played. So credibility is everything. That means between being elected and that first public meeting, you've got to have some concrete steps achieved. It means coming in, day one, sitting down with the officers and the directors of the departments and saying these things need to be done now, and we're not going to wait any longer for this and this to happen, and I'm not having any more huge wordy documents that run on for page after page after page and say nothing. We're going to do what Cllr said, and we're going to do it in terms that people understand, not management gobbledygook. I'm very good at management gobbledygook, but I also recognise it and know that other people hate it and can't work with it. So that kind of thing is going to be sorted straight away between election and the first meeting with the improvement plan.
You quoted, and I hope I've got the right quote, in the Birmingham Mail, as saying that part of what you really need to be doing as the leader is run an efficient council, make changes quickly, reduce the massive equal pay debt, and more importantly, to live within our means whilst providing high quality services. Now, how does Birmingham City live within its means whilst providing high quality services, whilst on the one hand it's being squeezed from central government?
Well, you're right about the squeezing, and Albert has in fact made that case very eloquently with his Jaws of Doom and his other examples to show how local authorities are being, particularly Birmingham, is being unfairly penalised. So you still have to continue that campaign, because that's undoubtedly correct. Birmingham's been treated badly. We shouldn't have had so much cut-off as other authorities, which don't suffer the same extent of deprivation, the same complexities of running a large urban area, have got, in effect, off scot-free. Some of them even had small increases. We've had huge cuts. So the question is this: is it possible to run Birmingham for less money? And the answer is yes. We've already proved that. We've gone down from 21,000 to 13,000 employees. And by and large, that's been done by automating systems and what's known as channel change. You can't hardly meet a person to discuss a housing issue now. You have to go online, you have to do things by email, you have to report things online. It's very difficult you can't certainly ring up a department. You haven't been able to ring up a department in Birmingham for a long time because we have a call centre. So the issue is, what further can we do by way of automation and changing the number of people that we employ in order to provide the same services? Well, the answer is there are expensive people employed, there are layers of management that we may be able to do without, there are zero-based budgeting techniques that allow you to say, what's the best practice in this, who runs it at lowest cost, why can't we do the same? What do we have to invest in? What do we have to automate? So we may have to borrow to invest, we may have to borrow to automate, but we do this simple arithmetic. We've gone from 21 to 13, we probably have to get down to somewhere like 8,000 or 9,000 people if we were to balance the books the way the government would like by 2020. So I've said often to Albert and Ian, you work at cost reduction over a very long time scale on a continuous improvement basis with the employees working with you, devising solutions that make their life easier, that raise their productivity and maintain or improve quality. We don't do that. Places where I've worked in the City Council, like Civico, do that now. They're ISO 9000, they use continuous improvement, they're taking 1.2 million a year out of their costs, And instead of, as I said to Scrutiny once, their clients hating them, their clients now love them. So it can be done. You just need to know how to do it.
I wonder what you think about this, because there's an article in the Financial Times online, the ft.com, and it says this in terms: Birmingham is growing faster than any other UK city with greater levels of foreign inward investment. It's attracting large groups to financial sectors in the city, and Andy Street is quoted as Birmingham, it has rediscovered its self-belief. So it seems to me that on the outside, the FT see very positive things about Birmingham, and clearly there are. HS2 you might see as a positive, others don't, but that's neither here nor there. In a way, weren't all of those things being driven by people like Sir Albert and the previous administration?
Yes.
And isn't it somewhat a cruel part of history that in reality, and a Labour MP has said this to me, that Cllr is payback time for Sir Albert Bore for a personality clash that they didn't really get on? Do you buy into any of those conspiracy theories?
No, that's complete nonsense. We've got it. Cllr itself explains why commissioners were brought in. We know the Children and Young People and Families Department has been shockingly badly run, shockingly badly led, and ended up with a commissioner over child safeguarding. And then we had the entire mismanagement of the Trojan horse forgery, the malicious hoax, which then led to another commissioner being brought in. So we've had a situation where, if you read Cllr, it says the financial mismanagement of the city, which includes, for example, the DCLG being asked again and again for hundreds upon hundreds of millions of pounds to pay off an equal pay bill that no other local authority has. That's simply incompetence on the most gross scale. So when you add up things like heaps of green waste covering the city for a year, when you add up things like £2 million of fines being levied illegally on people who innocently went into bus lanes and committed no crime, when you add up all of these different incompetences, you can't say it's a personality clash. It's a valid judgment on a mismanaged authority. It's as simple as that. Now, having said that, that then says, well, how do you fix all these things? And I hope I've given you some explanation of how all of these things can be fixed. But there's no personality clash. There's louder mouthed, more aggressive local authority heads who've made more of a nuisance of themselves. And Sir Albert has not, I don't think, brought this on himself, other than by the management style that he and Councillor Whitby before him have taken advantage of the Local Government Act 2000, which let them run the City Council this way. You know, the Local Government Act 2000 gave us this alternative to the committee system, which was well, there's several. There was a city manager system offered in the Act, and then there was the one where you had a leader and a cabinet. And we opted for a leader and a cabinet, and both Sir Albert and Lord Mike Whitby have used that to their personal advantage in terms of maintaining their support by using patronage over appointments. So we've had a situation where the management structure was such that you were autocratic, and then you put people in place who weren't necessarily the best to run the job, but were the people whose votes would count when keeping you in when there was an election for your position. So patronage produces poor management.
And that's going to go out of the window under your leadership?
Yes, I've made no promises to anybody. It would be hypocritical of me. All the other candidates have gone around saying, vote for me, I'll give you a cabinet job, basically.
Are you going to have a cabinet?
Of course. You have to, but you can't just suddenly. I mean, I would prefer the committee system. Under the committee system, Birmingham did lots of great things, and all the things that you just itemised were doing so well are things that it was laid down by the work done by officers in the committee system. The committee system was more about holding officers to account, but what it meant was a number of people on each side of the House, whether you were in power or in opposition, learned all the nuts and bolts of actually running the city. And then one of them would eventually be chairman and know everything about it. Whereas if you look at appointments to cabinet positions, people are put in jobs who know nothing. about even how local government works. So how are they expected to function in a role where they've been given executive authority or advise Sir Albert? So then you get this succession of really, really bad decisions, which you can see were reflected in the things that Cllr said meant that commissioners have to come
Is
in.
there the depth in the Labour Party for good cabinet postings in your view?
Oh, absolutely. We've got some fantastic people who are not in the cabinet. We have had two great additions to the cabinet recently, but if you look at how that happened, we got Lisa and we got Councillor Holbrook, right? Lisa Trickett and Penny Holbrook. And Albert said, when he announced it, two brilliant, fantastic women, right? Absolutely great, really clever, really capable, okay? Albert said he'd taken them into, and this is said at the group meeting, because Ian Riley had told him he had to have more women in the cabinet. Not because they were good, not because they were brilliant, not because they've got great skills and track record, because Ian Riley told them. That shows you what's wrong about how the jobs were allocated.
Well, part of being the leader of the Birmingham City Council is not just the outward-facing part, and clearly you've demonstrated your CV, if I can put it that way, and your experience. And I don't think anybody would challenge that in any way. But also, there's a political dimension.
Yes.
And I just wonder, and I posit this question to you.
Yeah.
Do you have the connections with the right, and I've used this word advisedly, factions within the Labour group to keep them together? Because one former cabinet minister, member, many years ago, Andy Howell, said to me in an interview that managing the Labour group, a large Labour group of 78 councillors, who all want the ear of the leader, who all want to be at the top, who want you to take their telephone calls, reply to their emails, how are you going to manage those? Because I've heard, and perhaps I've heard this wrongly, that you can be forthright in Labour group meetings about things, and you don't really suffer fools gladly. Is that a characterisation that I've got wrong, or something that you would adopt and say, that's the way it is, that's who I am, I'm Barry Henley, take me or like me not? Are you a Marmite type of person?
Not at all. And if you talk to any of the people who've worked with me, either in a Civico or Service Birmingham or anywhere else, you find that's not the case. Okay, I do have empathy. I am kind to people, and it's not a question of not suffering fools gladly. What tends to happen in group meetings is I try and be loyal. I say nothing outside the meetings. I say nothing in general, support the line of the leadership and of the Labour group at all times in council meetings, right, and speak on Labour group policy in accordance with what's been asked for by the leader or the deputy leader. Please talk about this. So I do all of those things. However, in the group, it is absolutely necessary occasionally for somebody to stand up and say, does that policy make sense? And sometimes I'm the only person who does that. I can't help that. If other people tend to come along afterwards and say, oh, you're right there, you know. But because the system of patronage, they don't stand up and say it, okay? So I'm not beholden to anybody. When the jobs I've taken, the ones I've listed to you, things like Chair of Civic, Chair of Service Birmingham, Chair of Sacre, Chair of the Conservation, are unpaid. I do more work, or when I had those other two chairs, than any other member of the council for nothing. I don't get paid. All these other chairs of district committees and chairs of planning and chairs of public protection and cabinet members, they all get paid. I turned down all paid work so that I couldn't be accused, and I wouldn't be on the patronage trail. Okay?
Does that mean then that you were offered roles as perhaps a cabinet member or as something else?
No, certainly was not offered a role as a cabinet member. I was offered lower level roles, which I declined.
Right. But that still doesn't answer, in a way, the political intrigue that seems to be going on at the moment. At the moment, you've said all of you, the other councillors, are out offering people jobs if they vote for you. I mean, that's a pretty damning thing to say about your fellow candidates, and B, the very nature of the Labour group. How's that going to be resolved for the future? How are people who listen to this interview going to have confidence that Labour should be the group that governs this city and takes it forward?
Right. My own view is we should change back to the committee system, but that DCLG are not going to give us 2 years off to restructure and reorganise and do everything differently. And that if we went back to the committee system, as some other towns and cities have already done, that we wouldn't have this particular problem. In the committee system, and the reason Lord Adonis hated it, it's Buggin's turn. You gather experience, eventually you work your way up after many, many years to become the chairman of a committee, but you have to have had loads of experience. Adonis hated that. He wanted a system where executives would take decisions in a private sector managerial style, so that's why he recommended this new structure. I don't think it's worked for Birmingham. So the answer to the question, two-part. Can I keep the Labour group happy? Well, the answer is it's through your appointments, through your chief whip, through the diversity you show in your cabinet appointments. You can do that without compromising on quality and capability. Then you rely on your cabinet members to show that they are deserving of that judgment, that they are capable and they can run their departments and they can work with their officers satisfactorily and they can accept responsibility. So, I mean, the examples we've had of late, I've already enumerated them, where cabinet members have just totally failed, too many to sort of mention, but cabinet members stand or fall by their own success and their own achievement of their objectives in my kind of system. And if they're no good, they get demoted or they get fired. And that's it. So what you then get is respect that you're doing the job correctly, that you're taking in the views of the Labour group, so the door's open, you're at the group offices, instead of being isolated and away from the group, you're there with the group. And so if they want to talk to you, they can talk to you. They don't have to pick up the phone and send an email, they actually talk to you, right? And all of that is possible, and you have to organise your working day and organise your arrangements and organise the time in the council house in order to make sure that you are in touch with the members, because it's the councillors who are in touch with the people outside. And if you cut yourself off, you've no idea anyway. So my belief is, yes, you can do it by patronage, or you can do it by having people there on merit who earn respect. Either way works. The only thing that works for the city is to have people there on merit who earn respect by achieving their objectives and satisfying the needs of the councillors who are representing the people.
Can I turn to just one particular example? The Library of Birmingham.
Yes.
And the well-known problems.
Yes.
Your late wife worked in libraries, and in fact, I think you said for 30 years or
Absolutely.
So. You believe in libraries. You clearly believe in education. You've done a lot of it and believe it's absolutely central to people's achievements, and libraries are at the heart of that,
Absolutely.
Especially in working class communities where they don't have access perhaps to facilities or mentors and various other things. And I get the impression that Esther, your wife, acted as a bit of a mentor for various people and helped them out in certain circumstances.
Because we met them in the library, through the library, yes.
Fine.
Indeed.
Is there a future for the Library of Birmingham and the community libraries under a Henley administration?
Well, there is. We have to go back a step. We shouldn't have the Library of Birmingham. We have a building out there, of course, which we're looking through the window now at the old Central Library, which is being demolished, which originally the plan that Brian Gamble, who ran the libraries, had was to refurbish for about 20 million quid, which is what Manchester spent on their library. So Manchester didn't make the mistake we made in the 80s and knocked down the Victorian Library. They've had 2 refurbishments and spent far, far less money on libraries than Birmingham, and have got one just as good. In its original Victorian building in Peter Square, their library was upgraded for about 23-24 million quid. Albert said, no, we'll have a new library, because we've moved that one out of the way, we can build Birmingham's Twin Towers or some other office development on that site, it's vital, and he wanted to move the library to East Side. Albert's plan was to do the same as we've done with the convention centre, get 2/3 of the money from Europe. So 180, 190 million library, we'd only pay 50 or 60. Whitby came along and said, to hell with that, I want this library built. I won't be able to wait for European money to come through. And anyway, with the change in government and the abolition of AWM and GOWM, Government Office West Midlands, European money ceased to flow because the LEPs weren't even set up. So we borrowed all the money, and now we're paying interest on that money. We borrowed 190 million quid to build the library, and I'm paying interest that we can't afford. Our interest bill is so high, it's almost the same as our council tax income. That's our problem. Not only that, we've still got the overhanging equal pay debt to pay back. So we could have afforded the library if we didn't have the equal pay debt. But equally, we put 190 million into the library. We put nearly 500 million into New Street Station, which we didn't have, which we borrowed. And we lent money to Edgbaston, the cricket ground, which it doesn't look as if we'll ever get paid back. So in other words, there was an element of profligacy which we are seriously suffering from now because we have to pay the interest bill on that profligacy. However much we like New Street Station, however much we like library. And the weird thing is that instead of the library site generating money, we've had to give 60 million to the developer in order to get them to develop the site. So that's more money that we didn't have and we've had to borrow. So the whole situation, as I've said over many years, and I'm the only person who stood up in the council chamber and in group explaining to people line by line why we didn't have the money to do this and what we need to do, but still, never mind, it all still went ahead. Now, that brings us on to the present day of the library. Yes, we did the wrong thing. No, we can't afford it. Yes, we're going to have to cut other things in order to be able to pay the interest bill and to keep the community libraries open. In my view, whatever needs to be done, particularly involvement of the third sector, we should keep the libraries open. They're wonderful. I said this last night at the hustings. They're absolutely wonderful institutions. The opportunities they give to people who don't have books on the shelf at home, who don't have a computer at home, are absolutely invaluable. We're not going to improve things like child poverty and other issues in the city by doing things like closing seats of learning like libraries. So we must do everything in our power to keep them open and keep them functioning and give people what they need in terms of books and computers and things like that.
But they're going to have to accept a lot less than the building that they thought they were going to get when it was opened only 2 years ago.
Well, no, because in fact Penny Holbrook's done quite a good deal whereby the Brass House, which is our language school, moves into the library. It takes over basically one floor that was reserved for offices and meeting rooms. So by redoing that, we then, and the language school was always open till 9 o'clock at night for the language lessons, right? Because they go on in the evening. So that allows us to keep the library open longer hours and things like that. So Penny Holbrook has made the right decisions about making the central library more sustainable. But I mean, essentially, this city needs to live within its means and reduce its debt in order to reduce its interest bill to help living within its means. So that means we do need to sell some assets. But that will
Which
help.
ones?
Which ones? Well, we've already sold the NEC. The obvious one to sell is Grand Central itself. What happened was, in order to build the New Street Station, right, above New Street Station, what they'd done in the 60s was they'd concreted over the station and built a shopping centre, the Palisades, and built a car park on top. So they had to go. So BCC bought the Palisades for £300 million. So this could all go ahead, and chipped in some more money as well. Now, the logical thing, therefore, is to sell what is now known as Grand Central. And I don't know what it will yield. The last time I saw in the press were order of 200 million, but even 100 million loss.
A bit of a fire sale then.
Not really. If you look at just property prices generally since 2007 when they peaked before the crash, they've just, for commercial property, has just collapsed. You look at all the buildings around the city, you can buy an office building that was 60 million quid for 20 million quid now. So not a fire sale, just the nature of property prices is up and down, which shows you if you don't know what you're doing, you should not invest in property. And that's what we did by buying the Palisades. We invested in property.
John Clancy talks about sweating the assets.
Yes.
Is that something that you think is a good idea, or you don't think about sweating them? You think it ought to be, in fact, selling them outright and getting the money in and balancing the books? Barry Henley, we were talking about sweating assets in the that the city owns, and as part of the proposals, and presumably some of the things that Councillor John Clancy has been talking to people about. You've talked about selling Grand Central, talking about perhaps other assets. So you believe there needs to be a robust look at what the assets are, sell them, pay off the debts, try and resolve the equal pay bill, which on various figures I've seen seems to be about £800 million still to be paid out. They're huge numbers anyway. Is there assets within the city that we can use to pay off those bills? Do you think that people in Birmingham are ready to see them losing what they think is their heritage within the city, those buildings?
Yes, there are very short-term measures you can take. They're not advisable. For example, you could sell the council house and lease it back. There are plenty of cash-rich organisations who would be happy to do that. So in theory, it's possible to raise lump sums of cash now, but of course you raise your outgoings for the future. And the question then is, do you save more in interest now by getting the cash in now than you pay out in lease payments later? And in certain circumstances, that will be true. If you've got any high-cost loans that are at 10, 11% from some time ago, if you could pay those off by doing a sale of a property and lease back, because the yield you give on property is maybe 5%, you may be able to do a deal that was worthwhile, actually cut your bill by the difference between the 10, 11% interest and the 5% lease. So there are different ways of doing it, but I have to say the city officers are good at that. The city's got a treasury that manages money very well. We've had the Conservatives and Lib Dems in power for several years. They did everything they could to raise as much money as they could without raising council tax, because that was their ideological bent, was to not raise council tax and to make as much as they could out of the assets. So there's not that much leeway left. We have been giving ourselves planning permission for housing development on council car parks and then selling the car parks. We've been doing all of those kind of things. So we'll carry on doing those, but there isn't a huge change in the finance of the city in the way that John imagines. Raising bonds, you still have to pay the interest on the bonds. Sale and lease back of assets, you've still got to pay the lease charges. There isn't, John tends to imply there's a huge pot of money out there on social impact bonds, on Brummie bonds. I think there isn't. The easiest and cheapest way to borrow money in this country is from something called the Public Works Board, which has been going since the Napoleonic Wars. It's the lowest cost lender, and it's a lender of infinite capacity because it's backed by the British government printing money. So it never runs out of money. It's got as much as you want at the lowest interest rates that are available to any borrower, and Birmingham City Council can borrow from there. The point is that Birmingham City Council has been refused permission to borrow by the DCLG that says we're getting too in debt. And they said we can't borrow any more to pay that equal pay bill you just talked about. We're not allowed to. That's why we started selling assets. Otherwise, the council would have carried on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. But as I say, our interest bill is ridiculous, even at these low rates of interest. So there are ways of adjusting our outgoings by financial engineering. But what John imagines just isn't going to happen, because he's not the only person. He doesn't run a city now. There are lots of people running cities. They haven't been able to do what John says is possible. And they're just as good and just as clever, and they've got the finance wizards with them and the financial advisors, and they can't do it. So I think he's really over-egging the pudding there. And by over-egging the pudding on what he thinks he can get in, has allowed him to make promises about what he's going to spend, which he can't keep, which is the real problem with the Clancy message.
So the Henley message is very much, I'm telling you the truth. The cupboard is fairly bare. This is what we can do. We've got to cut our cloth according to what we've got in the Treasury. We've got to be sensible, and we've got to tell the public. Is that a great political message that the Labour group want to be sending for 2016 and thinking they might not be getting re-elected?
It's not quite, exactly. It's not quite as negative as that, because I think maintaining services whilst reducing expenditures actually can be interpreted by the electorate as a benefit that they wish to see. The electorate, after all, brought in a government only in May this year that was promising further austerity. And if you like, in the stick and carrot approach, the carrot is supposedly that there'd be lower taxes as a result. Now, the electorate have voted for that. And so if we can reduce our expenditure whilst maintaining our services, which I believe we can, then that is what the electorate actually really wants. The electorate doesn't want a spend philosophy in local government. That's what they've voted against. And they've had the message about the cuts to local government absolutely rock solid. Albert put it out there. Every newspaper that we put through every letterbox in Birmingham said from 2005 to 2010, look what terrible things the government is doing. And the electorate voted in that government. So perhaps they didn't think it was so terrible.
I get the impression that you're really up for this job.
Oh,
you
yes.
would really kind of, more than think you've got the skills, you're kind of excited by it.
Yes.
It's a new challenge for you in your life.
Yes.
You're in your 60s. You think you can contribute. Do you see yourself as being not an interim leader, as Mike Leddy has indicated that he would be if he was but a leader for many years?
Well, I'd like to think so. Mike and I are the same age, by the way. I'd like to think that it's possible to lead this city to a relative calm, relative prosperity, relatively well managed. I've lived in Singapore and Sydney and many other cities around the world which were calm, prosperous, well managed, great places to live in, not with endless crises. There's no reason why Birmingham shouldn't be the same, and I'd like to be the person who did that on a long-term basis, not interim, not short-term, on a long-term basis.
Barry Henley, thank you for speaking to Labour Lives.
Pleasure.